They say only two certainties in life are death and taxes. However, if you were alive between November 2nd and December 1932, you could add a third certainty to that list, and that was the fact that you would witness the most epic showdown between man and animal in the history of the planet. And no, it was on some valiant knight slaying a fire-breathing dragon because the beast in question was a bird. Not just any bird, mind you, but the flightless bird, the emu. It all started when these giant birds decided they wanted to revolt against their oppressors, the Australian farmers. It was the year 1932 and the Great Depression was in full swing. The drought had been raging for many months across Australia, and the farmers were running out of food and water for both themselves and their livestock. So they did what any rational people would do in that situation. They rounded up their flocks of emus and prepared to slaughter them. These birds were massive, standing up to 6 feet tall and weighing over 100 pounds, not to mention that they had powerful legs and sharp beaks and claws. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and the farmers needed this meat to survive. But here's where the story takes a turn. One day, thousands of emus broke free from their enclosures and headed towards the town of Campion, which happened to be hosting the annual agricultural show. Now, you might be thinking that emus storming an agricultural show is pretty on the nose. And you'd be right, but it gets better. At the time, there was a military camp nearby with several soldiers present. So as the emus approached the town, the soldiers opened fire. They were armed with Lewis guns, which are essentially lighter, more portable versions of the classic World War I era Vickers machine gun. This was a massacre. Hundreds of emus fell victim to the soldiers' bullets, but that was just the beginning. This revolt was far from over. It turns out that killing hundreds of emus wasn't enough to stop their rebellion. More birds kept coming in droves, destroying crops and wreaking havoc. By November 2nd, the situation had become so dire that the government intervened and sent in reinforcements. This force consisted of 40 soldiers led by Major Meredith, who was given orders to kill every last one of the rebellious birds. And so the battle began. The soldiers advanced on the emus, firing their rifles at them, but as they got closer, they realized that these birds weren't going down without a fight. They fought back with their sharp beaks and strong legs, kicking and scratching at the soldiers until they finally This was a humiliating defeat for the soldiers, and they had to regroup and come up with a new plan. Meanwhile, the emus were celebrating their victory, strutting around the battlefield and gobbling triumphantly. But their joy was short-lived. The soldiers returned with a vengeance. Armed with even more firepower, they set up Lewis guns and opened fire on the emus, killing dozens of them instantly. Yet still the birds refused to back down. They kept coming forward in waves, determined to fight until the very end. The soldiers were amazed at the tenacity of these birds. They had never seen anything like it. It seemed like no matter how many emus they killed, more kept coming to take their place. The battle raged on for days, and it became clear that the soldiers were in over their heads. They had never signed up for this. When they enlisted in the military, they had visions of fighting wars and seeing the world, not battling giant killer birds in the Australian outback. As the situation grew more desperate, the soldiers began to panic. Some of them started to question their sanity. Were they really fighting a war against giant killer birds? Had they gone insane? Others simply ran away from the battlefield, leaving their comrades behind to fend for themselves. It seemed like the emus were winning. Their numbers were too great, and their strength and determination were unmatched. But just when all hope seemed to be lost, Major Meredith came up with a brilliant plan. He ordered his men to dig trenches and set up another Lewis gun. Then he waited patiently for the emus to make their next move. Sure enough, the birds came charging forward, but this time they walked right into a trap. The Lewis gun opened fire and mowed them down, killing dozens instantly. Yet again, the soldiers thought they had finally won. But then something strange happened. The emus didn't retreat. They kept coming forward, even though they were taking heavy losses. It was as if they were hypnotized, and then Major Merritt had realized what was going on. The emus weren't attacking them randomly. They were targeting the soldiers' trenches specifically. The birds had learned from their previous mistakes, and were now using their intelligence to outsmart the humans. Meredith knew that he had to do something drastic to stop the emus once and for all. So he ordered his men to abandon their trenches and fall back to a safe distance. Then he brought out a second Lewis gun and took aim at the leading emu. With a burst of gunfire, he took down several birds, but not before they had managed to reach their goal, digging their sharp beaks into the soft earth and creating small holes. The emus then huddled together in large groups inside the trenches, making themselves safe from the soldiers' gunfire. Major Meredith realized that he was in a tough spot. The emus were using their superior numbers and intelligence to outmaneuver his troops. He needed a new strategy, and fast. But while Meredith was racking his brain trying to figure out a way to defeat the emus, the birds made their next move. They left their trenches and charged towards the soldiers, their sharp beaks and claws outstretched. The soldiers fired at them, but it seemed like it wasn't enough to stop them. The emus kept coming forward, wave after wave, until finally Meredith had had enough. He ordered his men to shoot at the ground in front of the emus, not trying to hit them, but hoping to scare them off. The birds scattered, running away from the noise and the danger, but instead of following them and finishing them off, Meredith and his men stayed put. Why? Because they had stumbled upon something incredible. When the smoke cleared and the soldiers approached the spot where the emus had been standing, they found something that made their jaws drop. The birds had left behind thousands of eggs, enough to feed an entire battalion of hungry soldiers. It was a gift from the emus, a peace offering of sorts, and the soldiers accepted it gratefully. They gathered up the eggs and scrambled them up into an enormous feast, which they ate with relish. It was the best meal they had tasted in months, and they celebrated their victory over the emus by gobbling up every last egg. And so the emu war came to an end, not with a bang, but with a whimper. The soldiers packed up their guns and headed home, leaving the emus to roam free in the Australian outback. As for the emus, they went back to their normal lives, strutting around the countryside, gobbling and laying eggs. They had won their freedom, and they were happy to be left alone. The soldiers had learned their lesson the hard way. You mess with Mother Nature, she'll mess with you right back. But in the end, maybe it was all worth it. After all, who doesn't love a good omelette? But what do you think? Was Major Meredith right to order the slaughter of the or was it cruel and unnecessary? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic tales of man vs Wild. See you next time. Now, check out this video on the weirdest animal attacks in human history. Or this video. It's fascinating stuff.